grabbed the Boost Assault from Central. The stickers for the 650 Boomerang pieces were in. So I was kind of bummed, like, things are 40 bucks, you know, 20 bucks each, 40 some odd dollars. And I was like, man, that's a lot for 2 stickers when I could have them recut somewhere else. But the little saving grace is that they're templated for the panel. Oh, geez. Oh, no. Oh, you hate to see it. This is how I put these things on. Usually just mark one end here and then kind of do a little guideline back here in case I get towards the end it's way off. Not like it's going to matter. If you get that far and you're way off, you're kind of screwed anyway. But start up here, and then as it goes on, just kind of eyeball your gap all the way across and put her on. It is, again, 7:45 at night, Saturday. About to yank the skid out of this thing here and prep for tomorrow, putting all these goodies in it. All that stuff is gonna go in. This skid that currently has some nice solid rods in it while all the shocks were out to Andy getting all rebuilt and everything. We'll get all that in tomorrow. I also have to basically make a template off of this zone here to make a new bolt hole somewhere in this region. We'll see how much room we have, where the wheel mount goes, and I gotta pick a spot here, and hopefully it clears the torque arm and all that stuff. But I have the long torsion springs from the 2024 cross-country sled to try and retrofit into this 129. Time to get after it and get it done. tip for you guys that I've been doing for a couple years now. I don't know if a lot of you use electrical tape or not, but if you do, the 3M Super 44 stuff comes in these awesome round little containers with this little like snap lock kind of lid deal. They're great for miscellaneous bolts and things, and when you pull something apart, throw a little piece of tape with a label on it, snap it up, huck it in your toolbox and forget about it until you come back to it. And then it's all labeled. You can get obviously real intense with your labels and put where each bolt came from if you're a nerd, but usually that's enough. So yeah, little pro tip for you. Sunday morning. Let's see if I can juggle all this and not dump anything. All right, there's my hand. Sunday, Sunday, Sunday. Except it's not monster trucks. It's more awesome sleds. Let's get after it. Let's keep getting this in there. That's good, right? I'm gonna take my time with this skid here, go through the Hygear instructions. That way, hopefully I can assemble that whole linkage assembly and the shocks and everything in one shot and not kind of get it together and then realize, hey, this has to come back out to get this bolt in because that doesn't clear past this thing when you have that in there. That whole deal that I'm sure a bunch of you have run into before. Check that out, huh? Some guys are gonna remember that, okay? But anyway, yeah, we're gonna get this thing together, hopefully mock up those springs. I don't think I'm gonna run those right off the bat. I wanna get everything mounted and done so that I can put it in down the road without having to do this whole ordeal of drilling and template and all that. I wanna get that knocked out today. That way I can ride it with the stock torsion spring location, see how that goes, and then swap over and have something to compare to and not just put them on and be like, this is great, but I don't know if it's an improvement over what a factory one would be, if that makes sense. So this sled's got 1,900 miles on it. Granted, this junction is not tight, but that's a lot of wiggle room. This linkage and this lower Gullwing is what gets replaced with the Hygear setup. They're moving this link rod joint down to the middle of the arm and changing the location of the shock in relationship to this whole thing. And what that ends up doing is changing the motion ratio. So essentially, the amount of travel back here as this arm compresses the shock at a different ratio. So right now, this relationship, let's just say for the video, it's 1-to-1. So when you move this an inch, it compresses the shock an inch. So with the Hygear kit, 1 inch of travel back here is going to be a different ratio of shock compression. So that's where the motion ratio term comes into play. So when you move this an inch, it may only move the shock 1/2 inch now with the Hygear, or once the Hygear is in. Okay, so just went through the instructions. Pretty straightforward. Remove the factory stuff and then essentially reassemble in reverse with the new stuff. There doesn't seem to be anything crazy tricky other than when you get the front together, it's gonna overcam. It's not gonna sit kind of like the factory one did. It might sit in a different orientation. They say not to be alarmed. If it's tough, whatever, there's a spacer for the shock. Not necessary. Yeah, that's the only thing I see that's different or kind of goofy. There aren't any torque specs, so I would assume go with factory stuff. If you're concerned with that, look all that up and use the factory Polaris torque specs. So yeah, if you have a good sense of, you know, what is tight and what isn't, and you're not concerned with the torque specs, I'm sure most of you that are handy can figure it out on your own. That said, I don't think I got any instructions for the Gullwing assembly. I would assume that the cross rail here that houses the limiter strap probably has to come out or at least get loosened up. So that way, once the Gullwing bolts are all out, you can spread the rails apart a little bit to finagle this thing out of there, because it's going to be a little tricky getting the bottom out of this rib and whatnot. So we'll see. I'm going to go ahead and just undo one bolt and try to cheat this thing. It'll spread if one side's unbolted, and that way I don't have to loosen both and mess around with that. We'll see if it pans out. What? Well, that's interesting. This side is apparently tighter than that one. Boy, they don't want those coming out. Yikes. With the Loctite to the moon, brother. One thing you will want to watch out for, it looks like just the upper side. Yep, looks like just the upper side has a washer between the Gullwing bracket and the rail. So those will be tricky to get in and out, kind of like skidoo shocks kind of have a similar thing on the bottom. So just keep that in mind when you get to this point, when you start moving the Gullwing out and putting the new one in. I'm not sure yet if this one will have that same washer setup. This might be a tolerance fit where it just drops right in without the washer, but we'll find out in a couple minutes. Shoo! Long rod von Huygen bolt, am I right? Oh! What the? What? Yikes, careful of that. All right, they do say you need to remove the bushing from in here. Hopefully it's in decent shape and fits pretty good in the new one, because that ain't it, brother. All right, here's the old Gullwing out and the new Hygear one. You do reuse this bushing from the cam right here. That goes into that bottom bolt there. A little something like this. You reuse this guy. You don't need this bolt, they give you a new one. You don't need your front lower shock mount bolt, they give you a new one. These are new instead of that long cross one that I almost dropped. And then you do reuse these two here that mount in the lower hole back here. This assembly does go in a little bit easier than the stock one came out. You do not need the washers on either side of the upper or the forward mount, whichever one you would like to call it. You don't need these anymore. Yeah, this thing's pretty beefy. It's going to be pretty nice. It's going to strengthen all that up quite a bit. So there was something in the instructions about the way the logo goes. Shock orientation and direction of the logo. I don't know why that would matter. Because they're the same fucking thing. Don't know. They just want it to look good, I suppose. All right, it's Monday morning. I got off the phone with Hygear a little while ago about the linkage stuff in the back that you'll see in this video. I kind of explained what I encounter as I'm going through. There were 2 bolts for the linkage rods that were too short on my application. I want to get all that sorted ahead of time so before you see it in the video. So that way at the beginning of this video, it's all explained. As you go through, you see that. You have the explanation now, so no one's left wondering what's going on with that kit towards the end of the video. Everything fits. They are aware of a production run change on their end where they went from a different linkage rod style to a thicker one, which is very similar to the XCR linkage rods. So if you have an XCR and you got the linkage kit, your bolts are correct. They're the right length. They're 90 millimeters from the head to the end of the bolt, roughly. That's what I came up with. I'm not sure what their what their bolts are. With that in mind, the VR1s use a thinner linkage rod, VR1 or XC, any of the 129s that are not an XCR. They use an 80 millimeter bolt, which is too short for the Hygear linkage rods. So now they were made aware of that issue at the middle or end of last week, I believe. All the kits going forward are now supplied with a bolt. So if you have a VR1 or an XC and you're putting this Hygear linkage kit in, you're gonna get the longer bolts that you need to bolt the linkage rods in. If you got an early one, give them a call, they'll send you bolts. I encountered something a little interesting. I'm not sure what I'm gonna do yet. If you look at the thickness of this Hygear linkage rod in comparison to the old factory one, it's a lot thinner where the bolt goes through. I don't know if I didn't get a bolt in my kit or what, but you can see I got no thread engagement there. I don't know what I'm doing wrong, if anything. I think I have this sorted somewhat. The factory bolt for the upper and lower linkage rods is that guy. I got another one right here. One of these flanged head M8 by 125 thread. It is, let me get my arm, big old dumb arm out of the way. 80 millimeters from the flange to the tip, right? Well, that's not long enough for once you put both of these new thicker linkage rods in. I don't know if this is perhaps a running change on Polaris's end, where the sled that Hygear used for R&D had a longer bolt for some reason, or if this is a running change on the manufacturing of these that didn't get accounted for or something. But either way, the factory bolt is too short, and I don't have longer bolts supplied in the kit. Luckily, since I do all kinds of random motorsports shit, I have these two socket cap Allen head M8 by 125 stainless bolts. These are 100 millimeters long, which I believe are 10 mil too long. I think 90 is what you're gonna want. Let's see if I can do this number one-handed here. Ooh, baby, look at me go, huh? So the 100 is too long. I'm gonna have to trim this. Come on. Come on now. There we go. All right, get that in there. Eyeball where this nut has to go, and I'm gonna mark it with a nice Milwaukee Inksol marker. Cut this bolt down, smooth the end of it, make sure the nut still threads on, and then repeat for the bottom linkage bolt, and then get back to assembling this together. My first real gripe with the kit. The mismatched bolt ordeal, whatever, that shit happens. What I am having a hard time wrapping my head around is everything on this skid is metric, okay? This new shock pivot bolt is 3/8 24. So, I mean, it's not like you're probably not gonna be working on any of this kind of stuff on trail side or whatever, but if you do have to, now you have to carry a 9/16 wrench, ratchet, socket, whatever combo you wanna have to take this off, because now you have that size difference compared to everything else on here that is metric. Why? I don't know, man. That's the stuff that drives me up the wall. Oh, I hate when they do this. Found it. That only took 3 minutes. You'll have that on these big jobs, you know? I fully plan to get a hold of Hygear Monday and probably, hopefully, get the right bolts, or at least alert them of the issue so that they can check and see if they have to make a running change and supply people with a bolt or something. Either way, at some point, this will come back out and those will get switched to a regular flanged hex head bolt instead of the socket cap design. I just wanted to point that out so that way someone watching isn't like, oh, you did the same thing, you idiot. It's like, I know that was just a band-aid to get me by until I get the motivation to pull it all back out and do it again. Another little tip people might not think of, I mean, you'll notice it if you do it. These linkage rod bolts, leave them snug until you get everything assembled, because if you tighten them and they're off a little bit, you're not gonna have a fun time getting anything lined up. So just remember, the lower and the upper linkage bolts, leave them snug until you get everything assembled, and then go back through when they're parallel and tighten them up. This whole kit should work really, really well for creating a very linear and compliant feel in the top of your stroke while you're riding across the smaller, I'd probably say 6 to 10 inch chop stuff. And then once you encounter those really big hits, if you take them in the middle of the skid or the tail, as that starts to fall through that first 1-to-1 ratio and you hit that really stiff zone, it's gonna be awesome. It's gonna take over in the shock, especially with the velocity where you get past here and it really stiffens on its own anyway. Combine that with the valving and the mechanical leverage changes, it should really create a bottomless feeling rear skid that I would say hopefully is going to be similar to an R-Motion, what everyone has been chasing and trying to catch back up to for the last several years. Now we're on to the fun part, at least for me, what I think is going to be the fun part. Trying to fit the 2024 long cross-country torsion spring onto a 129. So you can see where this spring is gonna lie pretty far forward. I think at this angle here, I think under compression, it will end up hitting the wheel boss there. But it's hard to say. I'm not really gonna know until I kind of drill one hole in the middle where I think it can fit pretty good. And then I'll just have to go from there. I think this spring might need to be cut and shortened, which this is the softer version. So they make two spring options for the 2024 cross country currently. You can get the standard one that comes on the sleds, or they make this softer light duty one. I kind of assumed, looking at pictures and doing some quick measurements and stuff before I even got these, that I figured I would have to cut the end of the spring. When you cut the spring and shorten it, that obviously stiffens the ratio because you're reducing your leverage. With that in mind, I went with the softer one, kind of planning ahead to have to cut it and shorten it, because if it's measured, I don't know how these are measured actually from the factory. You know, I'm assuming they clamp one end and then they move the other one. If it's measured all the way out on the end here and I cut this thing and shorten it into here, that's going to be quite the rate change. If I only have to shorten it this much, you know, if it's designed to say ride here on a 136 where my finger is, and mine ends up riding here and I move it an inch, that's still probably a pretty decent rate change. So I kind of planned ahead with that and went with these softer ones, and it's just gonna be a test. You know, I don't know if it's gonna be amazing. It might be terrible with the Hygear linkage and that combined. It might be really goofy. I can't imagine that's gonna be the case, because what this is gonna do is when you mount it here in front of the rear mount for the front torque arm, as the front of your skid comes up, you're starting to already tie in this torsion spring way earlier than before. That should help to really make this thing stable and kind of move as a unit and use both shocks together over every bump instead of using the front and then the rear and vice versa. There's a reason why they did it on the 2024 cross countries, you know, and there's a reason why every arm motion, the mount is roughly in this area. It's, you know, the torsion spring is in front of the rear of the front torque arm. One thing I was worried about initially that I don't think is going to be any issue at all was the thickness of the head of this bolt for the torsion spring mount. It looks like with the front torque arm all the way collapsed down, touching its bump stop, it doesn't even come close to being down low enough to where that bolt is going to be. So that is a non-issue, thankfully, and I can continue to move forward. That's one side done. Got clearance on that bolt. All right, this custom stuff always takes way longer than you ever expect it to. You're like, it'll take me 2 hours, you know? 3.5 hours later of messing around and mounting stuff and making sure it's right and checking this and checking that. It takes forever. I'm sure a lot of you guys are familiar with that. Anyway, moving forward, you can see here we have our factory location for the torsion spring on a 129. And this is my location for the long cross-country spring. Made a little template. Where'd my template go? Oh no! Really simple, flat piece on top. You bolt it into the rear mount for the front torque arm. It drops down, sits on top of the rail here, and then you mark your other hole. Go ahead, drill that up, and then you're ready to basically take these off, bolt them in up front, and then throw the spring on. I ended up shortening, they're over here on the ground. I ended up shortening the tail 1 inch. It looks like it will clear fine, but there was just so much excess, I didn't really think it was necessary, so ended up taking an inch off of it, no big deal. I would imagine in the future that's just a good practice. If anyone else does this, I would just probably take that inch off just to be safe. I did decide to run the new cross-country spring right away. I'm just gonna throw them in because I'm gonna have to pull the skid out after I talk to Hygear and get the different bolts for the linkage arm mounts. Either way, I'll get that figured out in the future. Not too big of a deal. Luckily, there's no snow on the ground yet. So I can put all this in, see how the suspension reacts, you know, set in, stuff like that, with it all in and the springs up front and all that stuff. And get a good ballpark of like where the weight distribution is gonna go when I do my front end changes. With the springs, I ultimately hope to end up running. I really can't imagine them being a bad move. I can't foresee it doing anything crazy that's gonna be terrible that I'm gonna have to yank them off right away. But that might be the case. Hard to, you know, foresee that. Either way, those are gonna go in for now. I'm gonna throw the skid back in here shortly. I did forget that the front torque arm has to go back in with the shock and all that stuff. Too much on the brain. So yeah, cut over to that stuff now, putting this all back together. Torsion springs on, front track shock, yada, 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 grease all the bushings, and then back into the sled. Here's something to be aware of with your new Hygear linkage setup. Really close tolerance here between the high and low adjuster and the big new Gullwing bracket on a 129. This is with stock limiter length, so if you don't run anything looser than this, you're fine. But you can see there's a little bit of contact mark there from when I put this shock in and was getting everything assembled. In the future, when the skid comes back out to do the bolts on the linkage rods and some other stuff, I'll probably do different bushings here. I didn't do bushings right away in this go around because I knew more than likely something was coming back out at some point, and I wanted to see what got replaced with the new stuff and how everything assembled with the Hygear kit before I ordered bushings I may not need. So I'm all done for the night. Got the skid back in with the long cross-country springs on it. The Hygear linkage setup is in for the most part. Like I said, it's gonna have to come back out to get the right bolts and stuff in there. I'm gonna give them a call tomorrow morning and see where they're at with that and what they have to say. Sitting on the thing and jumping up and down, it seems soft in the beginning, but it has ample rebound, but it's not like topping out and kicking me off. I think these springs are definitely really strong. Like I said, I shortened them a little bit and they're mounted shorter than where they're supposed to be. So they're definitely an increased rate from what like they're rated at, if that makes sense. What do you think, Gordon? Huh? I see you checking it out, dude. Pretty sweet, huh? What are you doing, Gus? Huh? Yeah, I'm making fun of your big ass nose. Hey! Why are you chomping, dude? Take a joke. Ow! Dude.
good too.
First impressions of this Hygear kit, that thing is incredible. I think, like I kind of expected, I think these springs might be a little bit stiff for me, but once I'm all geared up and a tunnel bag on, they might be perfect. It's gonna be hard to say right now, obviously, you know, we're not out on the snow and everything's gonna be different out there, but that first little rip across the yard, this thing felt really good. That's gonna do it for this video. Hopefully I get the spindles back from the machine shop soon. I'd like to see those at the beginning of the week, but who knows, depends on how backlogged they are. When I get those, I'll do the front ski shocks. We'll go over some geometry stuff in the front and see just how drastic the spindles I have on hand are gonna be on this thing. One pair might be way too much and another pair might be just right. I don't know what's the thing with the porridge and the bears. We're gonna try and find the ideal setup, but it's definitely gonna take some time and it's gonna be a lot of tinkering. So hopefully it's a fun adventure for me and for you guys to watch and everything like that. If there's any, like I said in the assault video, if there's any ideas or setups or things you want me to try or things you want to ask me questions about, put it in the comments, send me a DM, whatever you got to do. More than happy to try and respond and come up with something cool.